Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the National Fragile X Foundation Let's Talk webinar series. Tonight's topic, Married with Fragile X Children. I'm Jane Dixon Weber, the Director of Education and Support Services here at the Foundation. And before I introduce our speaker, I have a couple items. First, I'd like to thank you all for being members of the National Fragile X Foundation. Your support helps us do so much for families in the Fragile X community. We're starting our membership drive soon, and you'll be receiving a letter in the mail with news about your support. So thank you. Also, housekeeping. We're going to go ahead and take questions throughout the presentation tonight, and just use the question box on the right side of your screen. And also use that question box if you have any issues. Now, tonight I would like to introduce our speaker, Diane Simon Smith. Diane Smith is a licensed marriage and family therapist in the Los Angeles area with 20 years of experience supporting parents of special needs children through individual, couple, group, and retreat modalities. She holds master's degrees in public health and in marriage and family therapy and has been a sought-after speaker on the subject of disability and dynamics. She brings 30 years of personal experience in raising a son with cerebral palsy and a son with Fragile X syndrome. They are her greatest teachers. Good evening, Diane.
Hi, Jane, and hello, everybody out there. Welcome tonight. As Jane said, this is a presentation about marriage and when you have a child or children with Fragile X syndrome. And as you can see, the title of this particular slide is Married and Unmarried, and that is basically just because I'm going to address some issues related to some people who have, their families have gone through reorganization. There may be divorce, there may be step-parenting, so I have some remarks related to that so that everybody can be included. So as Jane said, I want to make this as inclusive as possible and hear from those of you out there. If you have questions, obviously I can't answer very specific questions related, very clinical specific questions, but general questions are very welcome. So what I want to put this in a framework of is when we talk about marriage, one of the things, and some of you may have heard this, this would be a good poll question actually, but oftentimes when people come into my office, they will tell me, because I work with parents who have children with a variety of disabilities, that they've been given a diagnosis, and one of the things that they're often told is that there's a very high divorce rate amongst people who have children with special needs. And I'm happy about that piece of information. First of all, there's been recent research that actually shows that that is not the case. There isn't a higher than normal divorce rate amongst people who have children with special needs. And I think we need to put it in context of it is one of many kinds of stresses on a relationship, and there are many of those. There's unemployment, and there's illness, and there's in-law difficulties and economics and all those kinds of things. But there are some ways in which having a child with Fragile X syndrome or any other special need puts particular stress on a marriage and comes with particular gifts. We're going to talk about those too. So that being said, I wanted to talk a little bit, just tell you a little bit about really basic two qualities of healthy marriages. And this comes from the research of John Gottman, who is kind of the research guru. He actually puts people in laboratories and hooks them up for skin galvanizing response and heartbeat and that kind of thing, and asks couples to interact, and he makes certain predictions about whose relationships are going to last, and he's pretty good at it. And basically, very simply, he says, the qualities of healthy marriage are that they behave as friends and they handle conflicts in gentle, positive ways. Not that they don't have conflict, but that it's how they handle it. So to be more specific, that people in healthy marriages feel connected through time and affection. They have good communication and conflict resolution skills, and tolerance for each other's difference and respect. I think this is one of the very big surprises that we can have, because if you just look at what the normal development is for any relationship, there is a point in the beginning of relationships that we all know and remember where you're so madly in love and you believe that everything you think your partner also thinks. And it seems that way. And then after a while, you discover that you're actually two separate people. And moving through that particular phase, it can be difficult, but is a necessary developmental stage of any relationship. And so having a child with differences really challenges, because we discover a lot of new things about our partner. So healthy marriages also share a fair distribution of power and responsibilities. They feel like a team and they're able to adapt. And if nothing else, we all know that adaptation is really crucial in our families. They have a sense of both their individuality and their what I call we-ness. In other words, who are we as individuals and who are we as a couple? And that they're committed to the idea of marriage, even if they may not like their partner that day, that they're committed to the idea of being married. So before I go on, does anybody have any questions about just the generalities of what constitutes a healthy marriage?
There's none have come in so far.
Okay, well, feel free as we move along. So we know that when a couple goes through the transition of having a child, it can throw a couple into crisis. You know, it's a critical time of transition. But when a child has special needs, and there are some unique things about Fragile X syndrome that I want to remark upon, but two critical transitions for parents is, one is, how does each partner move through their own grieving process? And just to say a little bit about that, because this is going to come up again and again. You know, when a child, first of all, when a child has Fragile X syndrome, it's generally, unless you know prenatally or you have an expectation and you chose to test prenatally, you generally don't know that your child has Fragile X syndrome when they're born. And you may not know for quite a while, some longer than others, but you know there are some differences. And sometimes until that is confirmed, there isn't sort of the beginning of that grieving process. And so people's ability to, you know, maybe go into denial, which I have to say, sometimes I say it's a, you know, a very underrated defense mechanism, because it can be useful to get us through tough times sometimes. But everybody moves through grief differently. And we seem to have an idea that there's a prescription for grief and that it looks something like a staircase where you go up one step at a time through all these different feelings and land at the top, at the landing, and that's the place of acceptance. It doesn't really look like that, and most of you know that, because it's kind of a circuitous revolving door sometimes. And one of the things that I hear so frequently, especially from women, they'll come in and they'll tell me they don't think that their partner, their husband, is grieving correctly or grieving at all. But everybody's grieving looks different. And I just going to say that in generalities, and then we're going to talk about a little bit more specifics later on about when you know that there's trouble and there are problems with grieving. So that's the first critical transition. And then the second critical transition is, how do the partners, both as individuals and as a couple, experience this disability in their family, this difference in their family, and be able to move beyond their roles as just special needs parents and integrate their experience of being a couple. So I'm going to go and talk about, in general, what are some of the challenges for couples who have children, child with special needs. And when we finish this section, if you have some questions you have about these things in between, that would be good to, to find out. But before I go any further, I'm wondering if we can just do, is it possible to do a poll just to see who's out there? How many men and how many women are listening on this call? Can we find that out? Okay, so maybe that information will come up. So challenges for couples. First of all, establishing a bond, as I said before, just, with each other, despite the child's disability being all-encompassing. And accepting differences in emotional reactions to the information about the diagnosis of Fragile X syndrome and what that means for them. So people are going to respond very differently within a couple. Another challenge is adjusting to roles that meet the family needs in a way that is essentially fair and doesn't breed resentment. One of the things that can happen, and I see this a lot, is sometimes at the beginning of all the therapy process that the children need to be involved in, couples can kind of hunker down and say, we're in a crisis, this is what I do well, this is what you do well, and so maybe they divide responsibilities, like the person who makes the most money goes out and works, and the other person manages all the therapy and all the interaction with the agencies and all the things that happen with that. And then a year or two pass, and the couple starts to feel uncomfortable about, or one person in the couple starts to feel uncomfortable and perhaps some resentment about the way these roles have been taken on. And so one of the challenges is being able to make those adjustments by talking about them and maybe needing to make some changes in how people do things. Another challenge, of course, is retaining nuances of romance and ability to see each other as something more than parenting partners. Now notice it says nuances, it doesn't say grand romantic gestures, but sometimes just a touch, a remembrance, a good morning kiss, a ritual of embracing when you come home at the end of the day, those kinds of things to remind each other that you're not just work partners in raising these children. Also developing a creative vision for the future. When couples get married, certainly when they're about to have children, we all have visions about what we think that future is going to be like. And it's a wonderful pastime for couples to be able to talk about those things and dream about those things. So it becomes very challenging when the future, when the reality begins to look quite different than what we imagine the future would be. So developing a creative vision, even if it's being able to talk about the next weekend and something that would be fun to do. Okay, I mentioned that one again. I won't repeat that. So coping with financial strains, obviously there's the difficulty in who does what responsibility and who's earning the money and how much therapy can cost and all those kinds of things, which becomes very, very stressful. And negotiating division of labor and degrees of involvement, which kind of goes back to being in roles that work and don't breed resentment.
Diane, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
So, going back to that one about creating a vision for the future, I think that's a really challenging one for many families because I think that, with the unknowns, will my child be able to live independently? Is my child always going to live with me? And so it's, I think that's a real challenge for a lot of families to do, partially because of the unknowns of the future.
Absolutely.
Will your child be able? And so, is there any way to, any suggestions you have to get past that, or to help with that?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. Because in reality, the future is unknown for everybody. But we assume we have some kind of a roadmap when a child is typically developing. So. But what the degree of vision for the future obviously changes, and there's so much you don't know. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit later about even creating an exercise for a couple to begin to talk about their future. And I'm not even talking about the future that's going to be in 20, 30 years. Sometimes the future can be next month or next summer. I think one of the things that I know it was always helpful for me is to kind of look at the future in much smaller chunks. In other words, don't cast my eyes all the way up to the top of the mountain, but kind of look at what's in front of me, you know, because it just is exhausting to look at the top. So I think it can be really helpful for, I think this is part of the grieving process too, to be able to talk about the future they once thought and then the death of that dream, and being able to make adjustments based upon what they do know. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think it's a conversation that I think couples can really begin to avoid, and I think breaking the future down into much smaller pieces that are much more immediate can be helpful. In other words, something to look forward to.
Good one. I do have one more question that's come in, if I can ask it real quick.
Sure.
When you speak about communication, how do you move your conversations towards one another and not so often about your special needs child? We have a tendency to talk about our son, not so much to each other. Do you have any ideas for? And I would guess that we're all guilty of that. So.
Yeah, I think it's that's a universal thing. I mean, certainly all parents will say, I mean, people say this all the time to me. They go, well, we had our date night and all we talked about was the kids. Now, and that can be whether they have special needs or not. But of course, when the children do have difficulties, a lot of time then those conversations become kind of stressful. Because it's hard then to transition into, being a couple. So it's I think it's something very intentional in terms of being able to communicate about yourself, about your own experiences, about your, things that you do together that may not involve the children. I think it has to be very intentional about talking about oneself, talking about one's own feelings. That's why doing things together, if that's possible, creates opportunities to talk about something else other than the child, whether it's going to a movie or taking a walk or taking a hike. Then it becomes an opportunity to see each other outside of the setting of just being parents.
I think that's really helpful because, and I want to acknowledge that sometimes you might have something that you need to talk about your child. But you could say, okay, we're going to talk about us for 30 minutes, or we're not going to talk about our child until 7:30 or 8:30, whatever it is, just so that you do. Even if you have to bring up something that you did in the past, or some sort of memory to spark conversation other than your child, but it can be tricky. I know that's a tricky one.
Oh, it is, because our children totally absorb us. Sometimes, my husband and I will talk about Matthew because he's done something funny and hilarious, and it actually is a source of, pleasure to talk about that. But not always, not always. Sometimes it's stressful, and you kind of want to almost like say, remember me? I'm, the person you fell in love with. I'm not just the mother of this child who's really challenging me.
Right.
So anyway, those are some things I'll touch on, further. Okay. But, please, these questions are great because they kind of flesh out some of these ideas. Another challenge is feeling isolated, and I think that this is an experience that's just so common, and I think for a few reasons. Number one, when our child, is different from other people's children, sometimes we can tend to withdraw. We can, withdraw because it's painful to be around all the other children in the playgroup who are now doing all the things that the child development book said they were supposed to do and all the things we had hoped our child would do. So we may withdraw. Other people maybe not know how to approach us. They don't know what to say. They don't want to offend us. And some people just pull away because they really, you find out who your friends are. or children's behavior makes it really difficult to do the kinds of things and participate with friends and family that they used to do. So feeling isolated is a real challenge. Coping with lack of time together and alone, that's a really big one. I mean, sometimes, you know, people have difficult time even spending alone time in the bathroom, no less being alone with each other somewhere. And so once again, just like what we were talking about a moment ago about communication, being very intentional about time together. It may not even be getting out of the house for a date. It might be, for an example, getting up a little early so you can have coffee together, or, you know, being able to get together for lunch during the day while the child is at school. So there have to be very creative ways of being able to make a connection and have some time together. And of course, as I keep coming back to, managing emotional differences in grieving and coping is a real ongoing issue and challenge. Now, when I say they're challenges, it doesn't mean they can't be overcome. They're challenges, and they're there, and they're rather unique to people who have children with special needs. So I just want to, so go ahead. Yes, well, questions.
One of the challenges that I hear often, Diane, is that, especially when a child, you know, when they're going places because of a child's behavior, the couples have to split up. You know, they might take. And so, you know, there is some, you get frustrated with always having to split up because,
of course,
this is out. You know, you want your, I'll say typical, you know, it's not always this way. You want your typical child to experience some things, but in order to do that, one parent goes and one parent stays home.
Yes,
I mean, that's all kinds of variations of that.
Absolutely.
And that's a real challenge for a lot of parents, and I just acknowledge that is a real challenge. It's hard, you know. It's not fair, but I don't know what you would say for, you know, how you would help parents through that.
Well, I think acknowledging, first of all, that is very difficult. There's no easy answer to it. So these are the kind of adjustments that families make. One of the things, though, I do want to say is that because, I mean, what we're talking about is centering on the marriage or the couple relationship, but, you know, when you talk about the siblings and the whole family dynamic, we're going into a whole other area that where we talk about children who are typically developing, the sibling who doesn't have Fragile X, to be able to have some experiences that's their, you know, their sort of birthright too, that they should be able to be with their parents. And I think one of the things that's very, very difficult is the idea of sometimes, not all the time, but occasionally, the child who has Fragile X staying with someone who is a really good caregiver when that's possible, and the parents and the other child, or the parents going out and doing something without the child. I'm saying this because oftentimes the feelings of guilt that people have are just so overwhelming, that because it's not supposed to be that way. You know, you're supposed to be able to go out with your whole family. The truth is that sometimes the child with Fragile X may be more comfortable staying at home because of all the sensory and behavioral challenges that go with being out in the world, with unpredictability and things that happen that you cannot control. So I think having to make those adaptations is a real difficulty, but finding ways to acknowledge that it is important to have time together as a couple and time with the other children too.
Thank you. Good advice. Thank you.
So I'm talking about the gifts of having a child with Fragile X syndrome, and I just want to say at the outset, not everybody feels this way, and I'm not including this because I'm suggesting that you should feel that this is a gift, because not everybody does. However, this is what a lot of people have told me, you know, with children, not just with Fragile X syndrome, but with so many other kinds of disabilities, that they feel their life is different because they have a feeling of having some kind of special purpose. that they somehow have a sense of knowing what's really important, like a reordering of priorities, and a sense of gratitude for the smallest accomplishments of their child, and also feeling like a part of a team with their partner. So I'm including these things because there are ways in which some couples feel drawn together by these kinds of factors. And so, and a way of saying that it isn't all challenges and overwhelming and huge mountains to get over, that there are these lovely little, pieces here that really enhance people's lives. Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, so we want to talk about how you stay connected. And I'm going to be repeating some of these things because they can't be said too many times. For example, time alone together. I understand that's really easier said than done. But sometimes when, again, a couple makes a decision that they're going to take their relationship off the back burner and move it more towards the front, they may be able to allocate and prioritize time and financial resources and energy to making that happen for the two of them. The other thing that's really important is expressing appreciation sincerely and often. We all tend to take the things that our partners do for granted, and we forget sometimes that for many people, that expression of appreciation, simply thank you for doing this, and sometimes being very specific about it rather than, thanks for taking care of my kid. I really appreciate how you're a great mom. Or saying something like, boy, do I appreciate you letting me sleep in this morning and you getting up with him. So being able to express the appreciation. This one is really important, sharing laughter and finding humor in everyday things. A lot of times when I ask couples why, and this goes for all couples, what drew them to each other? Because that's a question I frequently ask in a first session. So what is it about he or she that made you want to marry them? Why did you fall in love with them? Invariably, one of the most frequent things people said is, he made me laugh. She makes me laugh. We find the same, find humor in the same things. So understanding that finding ways to bring humor, and sometimes it's our kids that are funny, so, but finding ways to laugh at things is a real way to kind of battle despair. Praising frequently and criticizing rarely. We seem to know this about how we treat our children, that you're supposed to say something very positive before you say something negative, but we kind of forget it once people get past a certain age and we're dealing with our adults, our spouses in particular. So remembering that people, of all ages need praise more than they need criticism. Respecting each other's different ways of dealing with your child's disability. So, and the way that can be reflected is just having an opportunity to listen without judgment. I think that's one of the most challenging things for all of us to do is, we can listen to our friends really well and we can listen, and understand their perspective, but with our spouse, there's such an investment in how our partner views things and how they feel about it and how it's going to impact us, that sometimes it's very hard just to listen. But that is something, isn't that what we all want, is a sense of being able to be accepted for who we are? And that goes along with this last one, accepting each other's strengths and limitations. Remembering that sometimes our partner's limitations and what they don't do seem rather glaringly large. And when I'm noticing that everything about my husband seems to be irritating me, I have to remind myself that he has to live with me. And there's some things about me that I don't do well and some things that I do well. So being able to accept and appreciate our partner's strengths as well as their limitations. Any questions about that?
Not right now.
Okay. So here's just a little bit of just some relationship enhancing behaviors, just things in terms of remembering, in terms of treating your partner. The softened startup. So there's nothing like coming home from work and having your partner say, I can't believe you did this again. You know, that is not a softened startup. A softened startup is something like, there's something I really need to talk to you about. When would be a good time to do it? Which, you know, can raise the hair on the back of people's neck as well, but it doesn't cause an extreme amount of defensiveness. Turning towards your partner. You know, we don't generally spend a lot of time talking directly to our partner's faces. We talk to their backs when they're in the kitchen. You know, we may be cooking, we may be doing other things, we may be calling to the next room. So having opportunities to actually sit face to face without any technology interrupting. Repairing ruptures. Every relationship has ruptures. In other words, we do things to hurt each other's feelings inadvertently, say things we don't mean, make a mistake. These things happen. And being able to repair a rupture means making a gesture towards reconciliation. I just want to say, you know, I know there's a saying out there that says never go to bed mad, and some people believe in that, but I will say that sometimes a good night's sleep can give you a completely different perspective in the morning, and sometimes our bodies just need an opportunity to calm down before we can actually address the issue at hand. Accepting influence from your partner. I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but I hear about this all the time in therapy. A partner can a husband can say something to the wife or vice versa many, many times. I really suggest you do this. And they don't seem to hear it, but they hear it when someone else says it. So this idea of being open to accepting what your partner has to say and give it a try can go a long way towards connection. And then again, using a high ratio of praise to criticism, really, really important. Kind of practice that. You know, some marital experts say 7 praiseworthy things to every criticism, and that's challenging because you got to keep count. So, but if you move towards the idea of, if I'm going to offer some criticism, I better be sure that I expressed adequate appreciation today as well.
7 to 1. 7 to 1 is a challenge.
It is a very big challenge, and it seems like it would take a lot of scorekeeping. But I think just as a rule of thumb, to just have a sense that if I'm thinking about criticizing my partner a lot, I need to reflect on whether I've been also offering appreciation as well.
That's great.
So here's just a little cartoon. You always complain I don't know how to show my emotions, so I made these signs. So we now have emojis, you know, to communicate feelings. But okay, so we were talking earlier about touching on this idea of being able to really appreciate and understand that everybody grieves differently and adjusts to, you know, difficulties emotionally differently. But there are some times when there are some red flags. And I think it's really important to understand that sometimes people need help. It's not just a matter of they're feeling differently, they're grieving differently. And some of these signs that a family member, a husband or a wife need help are there's an increased use of alcohol or drugs, engaging in other kinds of addictive behavior, including the internet, significant undereating or overeating. So all of these ways are ways to avoid feeling anything. Depression, signs of depression, anger outbursts, or a threat, you know, to harm oneself or somebody else. It's really important to pay attention to these signs and know that these are signals that more help is needed.
So Diane, what would you do if you are concerned? What suggestions would you have to address some of these?
Some of these issues? Well, I think it can be really tricky sometimes because one of the things that people do when they're engaging in some of these things is to have a sense of denial that there really isn't anything wrong. So I think one of the things that's really important is to be truthful about what you're seeing in your partner and how it makes you feel. Not like you're drinking too much, but I get really scared when I see you, you know, passed out on the couch every night. I get really scared when you know, I'm afraid of what's going to happen to you because I love you, and I really think you need to get some help. There are ways in which that can be useful, and sometimes what's really important is if you have a partner who really needs help, sometimes the best thing to do is to get help yourself. So you can really understand ways in which you might be sabotaging or enabling certain kinds of behavior, and there may be support that you can get as a family member, whether it's in Al-Anon or therapy, to, you know, or ways that you can set boundaries to protect yourself against, let's say, anger outbursts. So sometimes getting help for your partner means first getting help for yourself.
Good advice.
And, you know, there are more active ways. I mean, there are, you know, intervention ways to do these things. There are people who specialize in helping in that way. And, you know, if anybody has some questions about that, of needing some direction on resources, that could be something that, you know, they can email me about, or, you know, and I can make some general suggestions because I may not know the resources in your particular community.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's a little exercise that really this is about empathy. And this is something, so every 2 years or so, I hold a retreat for couples who have children with disabilities. And this is something I actually do with my husband, who is also an experienced group leader. And this is one of the exercises we do, which is always very eye-opening and pretty popular. So what we do, and I'm telling you about this because I think you could do this in the comfort of your own home, we divide the men and the women, and we ask the men this question: what is hard about being the mother of a child with Fragile X syndrome? And what does my wife need from me? And then we ask the women, what is hard about being the father of a child with Fragile X syndrome? And what does my husband or partner need from me? So what that does, and you could do this on your own, you know, you take a piece of paper, your partner takes a piece of paper, and you answer these questions. What it does is it helps you to get into what it must be like to be them. And then reflect on, what is it that my partner really needs from me? Sometimes we think we know what our partners need from us and we're not quite right. Or sometimes we know what our partners need from us, but we don't do it. So just in sharing over the years, I've probably done this maybe 6 or 7 times. And what's always so interesting when we get together and then share the information is that couples pretty accurately know what this experience is like for their partner. They just don't convey to them that they know. So the wise may say, I had no idea you kind of got that. So so the next step is about talking about it. So that's something that you might want to, you know, do as an exercise.
So you're saying that, like, it's like, wow, I had no idea that you really can understand all the stresses that are on me as the mom, and so
Yes.
And that men understand that more than we think they do.
Yes, they just don't necessarily let on, or act in ways that show that they do. So, and vice versa, women, you know, too, because that is something, certainly something that I hear a lot from people. Women will frequently say, he has no idea what I do every day. Mm-hmm. You know, the phone calls I have to make, the advocating I have to do, the amount of time I sit on the phone with Blue Cross, you know, all of that. And the husbands will say they have no idea how much I worry about my family's financial well-being. I know those are very, you know, stereotypical gender statements, but it can go both ways. Yeah, being able to really not just understand our partner, but let them know that we understand. And then talk specifically about what our what we think our partners need from us, and then actually asking them. Sometimes we tend to give our partners what we want, like we may love gifts, and so we shower our partner with gifts, but that may not be what does it for them. It may be that what they really like is, at the end of the day, to be greeted and say, how was your day, and then sit down and talk and really listen to each other. So really discovering what each person really, needs in the relationship. Okay, so this goes back to the question that you had, Jane, about, visioning the future. The vision board, the dreaming, sometimes it's like that whole scene just sort of melts away. It doesn't exist anymore. And we're kind of stuck with a blank slate that we have no idea what the future is going to look like. So one of the activities that can be, and these are opportunities you were asking before, about talking about something other than your children all the time, is to kind of take an opportunity to even say, what is my vision about what our future could be? And it may be about what you want for your relationship with your partner. What is my vision about what our relationship could be? Not necessarily all the things that your children are going to do, and if they're going to launch or if they're going to live with you, but ways in which you have a vision for how you want your relationship with your partner to be. And then the next question is, what one step can I take today that will move me towards making that vision a reality? Is there something that I could do differently that would help that vision become more real?
It's tricky. I mean, this can be a real challenge, and so.
Oh yeah, but there's no, and these things change on a regular basis. The idea that we're going to have our children are going to be launched and then we're just going to travel the world together, things look very different. It may be, let's make sure that we have a way to get away for a 3-day weekend once a year. That could be becoming, what the vision is.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to move on to the next part, but are there any questions about anything that we've talked about so far?
Let me see if I see anything here. So I'm not sure what this is relating to.
Okay.
But it says, do you find that when couples do this, they realize how important just acknowledging and affirming one another is for their marriage?
I'm guessing that you're talking about that exercise where I asked people what's hard about being the mother or the father of a child with Fragile X syndrome.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's what it might be referring to. And yes, it can be very affirming. And if not so, if our partners don't get it, to then be able to have a conversation so they do understand. I think one of the things we all long for is to be understood and to be accepted for who we are. So if we know that our partners get it, and it's very affirming to know that your partner understands what your experience is and that they have empathy for that. Maybe that's really the important piece, is the empathy.
I would agree. I mean, I think that's a very important part of it, just to let them know that.
Mm-hmm.
So another parent says 3 days away together would be a dream. It's absolutely hard to get this.
Yes.
And I think, you and I both have older children.
Mm-hmm.
We know how hard it is to get this. We would agree. I mean, that's why you didn't say 3 weeks away once a year. You said
No.
3 days.
And you know what? For some couples, 3 days away might as well be 3 weeks.
Yes.
Yes. So it sort of depends on what your resources are. It's very hard if you don't have family. It's very challenging if your child has really significant behavioral issues. So, you know, you start with what you can do. Can we get away for a couple of hours? Is a good start. In ways that don't necessarily have to cost money, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, maybe, you know, if you can go for a walk once a week, you know, get over
terrific.
On a Saturday morning and go for a walk. Now, I know when you have young kids, that's hard to do, but it's, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's not the 3 days a week, it's that, or it's that staying up late on you know, in the middle of, on one night. On Saturday night, we're going to, you know, have a late dinner after the kids go to bed or something like that.
Right,
But it's finding what works.
Yes, it's being intentional. I think that's really what it is. It's being intentional, because what we can tend to do is sort of roll along every day and doing the best we can to get through the day and not really even think about putting that in the forefront of our thoughts and minds.
Yeah. You're right. Being intentional about it that's where, and you forget to do that, and I think it becomes okay to remind the other spouse, oh, you know what, we haven't done anything together for a week. Could we please get up early, stay up late, watch a movie? Let's just do something. And it takes both. It takes both to suggest things. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've sometimes suggested, because often what happens with couples, one person's much more proactive about making plans, and so one of the things that I might suggest is if people make a commitment to a certain time every week, even if it's a couple of hours or whatever, and they take turns planning it.
Good. That's a good one.
Yeah, now keeping it up is not always easy. People will do it for a while, then someone gets sick, and then they get out of practice. But again, it's just kind of bringing that to the forefront.
Right.
You know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. You know, anybody who's listening to this or is going to listen to this has this on their radar screen. You know? Yes. They're thinking about their marriage.
I would agree. And these are just things that, I mean, like you know, you just have to be reminded of. Like you said, some of these things you can't say too often. And so. Right.
They seem common sense in a way. However, that with the recognition that it's hard, and I guess it's just deciding that this is what's really that this is important. You know, it's important to spend money. You know, not large amounts of money, but it's important to allocate time, you know, time, energy, and attention to your relationship in the long run, in the big picture, even if it's maybe not, you know, taking something away, some time or one therapy session from your child, that the investment is really worthwhile.
Well, and I think it's important to acknowledge, too, that sometimes you do get out of whack. And, you know, if you think about a pendulum, sometimes it swings, you know, it's, you know, like when it comes to like even taking care of, if you have two kids, you know, sometimes just get out of whack for a while. And you have to make an intentional thing. You know, we are going to swing this pendulum back and spend time together.
Right. It's like a thermostat. You know, you're sort of going along, and then something needs to self-correct. Yeah. You know, at some point.
So another question came on grieving, if we can just maybe touch on this before. Sure. How long would you say is typical or normal or a normal grieving period before it's considered unhealthy and a greater amount of intervention or support is needed?
Well, I think first of all, I'd answer that question by saying I wouldn't give it a time frame. And here's why. I think one of the things that's quite unique about this experience of having a child with special needs is that it isn't an event, you know, it is not, it has to do with the loss of a dream and of what you thought your life was going to be like, and the pain of seeing your child go through what they're going through. But it's different than the grieving of a death, which is, something happens, and even with that, there is no time frame, by the way. But when you have a child with a disability or with a chronic illness, because you're dealing constantly with a changing child who continues to grow chronologically, and sometimes things can get reactivated. Grief can get reactivated at a certain birthday, at a milestone birthday, at more information about their diagnosis, about difficulty with their classroom setting. For some people, when their children turn 16 and their child's not going to drive. So, in other words, you can recycle through grief again. So, I don't know what specifically this question is addressing. It sounds like there's some concern. I think what's important is to look at the person's behavior. Is the person withdrawing and not available? Is there, are they not, conducting their life in any way that's productive? Are they becoming paralyzed by their grief? Are they staying in bed? Are they, doing some of the behaviors that we talked about with, trying to numb their feelings? So I think there, the short answer is there is no time frame, but I think you have to look at the behaviors and ways in which people's lives are being impaired.
I got you. I mean, I think that, I talk with families at different stages, and I know that we remember what it was like to get a diagnosis. I mean, I remember how hard that was.
Sure.
And I remember the guilt feelings. I think that, when it comes to a relationship, I remember, I do remember the difference in how we responded to the same information. And
Yes.
I'm really sad and you're not sad. You don't seem to be sad, was kind of one of the things that occurred to me.
Right.
But, that's disrespecting that everybody responds differently. And so.
Yes. And grief is such a very personal, I mean, we all bring certain expectations and life experiences which influence how we experience a loss. For an example, when my older son was born, very, very premature. I mean, he was less than 2 pounds. And it was really evident that he was going to have difficulties. He was in the hospital for the first 4 months of his life. We didn't know if he'd survive. And so it was very clear to us there were going to be issues. We didn't know how severe, but we knew. So my experience of having a second child and having, first of all, just giving birth after 9 months instead of after 6 months, and having a child who really was, very responsive and sort of, for me, he was supposed to heal all my wounds and give me this experience. And so when he began to display the behaviors that brought us to the physicians and all the therapists, the sense of loss was, I think, for me, even more profound because of the hopes that I pinned on him. And so it can be that way with couples depending on what their life experience is. Sometimes fathers have a more difficult, I mean, this can happen, that fathers have a much more difficult time accepting the disability in a son than a daughter. It just has to do with what our own dreams and life expectations are sometimes. So it's very unique to us. So I'm going to move on with talking just, very generally about, when parents are no longer together, because I think sometimes the reality is that couples do split up. Sometimes we are in relationships with somebody who is raising a stepchild who has Fragile X syndrome. So those kinds of different permutations of family dynamics exist, and we can't address all of them. So just in real general terms, in terms of what you want to do in terms of if a couple splits up, your aim, of course, is to reduce the negative impact on your children, whether they have Fragile X or not. And so some really basic things are not exposing the children to the conflict, not letting them witness, if there's fighting going on, not allowing your child to emotionally parent you. Now, this, for some children, that may sound like they're not able to do that, but we can, it's possible to make a connection with your child in a way that they feel emotionally responsible for your well-being when you're going through a difficult time. So providing reassurance that you are fine and not allowing them to see you be very visibly upset. Not that they don't know you're sad, but that, when you're really, really upset or really, really angry, to try to do that not in their presence. Oops. And not confide your feelings about your spouse, and whether it's very basic or elementary information or feelings, finding other sources of support. Your child, remembering that your child has two parents who love them and they love. And so it does a disservice to the child when you denigrate their parent to them. It's not harmful to the partner as much as it is to the child. Encouraging the child to see the friends that they may have or to continue their activities, to have as normal as possible, with all the changes that may be going on, and refraining from, again, bad-mouthing the parent to the other parent in front of them, or maybe unaware that you are. We can talk on the telephone, and our kids my son has ears that can hear through 4 closed doors, and about something that I may not want him to hear. So just really being aware that children, listen. If possible, have both parents maintaining contact with all the therapists, teachers, and doctors. That's ideal. Being sure that your ex-partner, the child's other parent, gets information to them through email or texting. And when you have the conflict with your significant other, who's no longer your partner, to be able to put your children first. My first marriage ended when my children were 6 and 4, and I had 2 children with special needs, one with enormous medical needs later in his life, and we had to just make a decision, my ex-husband and I, that what was really important, that we were not going to talk about us anymore. So this is just the opposite of what you're doing, what we talked about earlier, being able to talk about yourself and your relationship. We weren't going to talk about that anymore because it was really all about being there for my son as he was going through whatever he was going through in the hospital. So, that's a more extreme situation, but being able to really put the children first. To keep communication between parents brief and to the point, and businesslike. And oftentimes I'll suggest that people do that by email, because when we get on the phone, sometimes it's easier to get emotionally re-engaged in a negative way. And to keep movement between homes consistent and predictable. So if you're a parent who is raising a child alone, whether there is the other parent in the picture or not, some of the things that can be helpful is creating a schedule and trying to be consistent. A really important thing to remember is that structure contains anxiety. Our kids have a lot of anxiety, and when we give them predictability and structure, and this goes for everybody, when we have a predictable life and we have structure, it helps us to feel more contained and less anxious. So having a schedule for visitation that's consistent is really important. If possible, work on co-parenting in the best interest of the children, keeping things as neutral as possible, and despite your personal differences, to focus on the children. Networking with other single parents who have kids with special needs. There's a lot of people out there, single parents in general, and sometimes that can feel like these are your people. They really get what you're experiencing. Just like we tend to drift and gravitate towards people who have children with special needs or Fragile X because we feel like they get it. And then creating opportunities for family time and maybe creating some new rituals for your families. Maybe breakfast on Sunday mornings. This is something we do, stay in our jammies. In other words, having some ways in which your new structure of your family becomes special and consistent. Are there any questions out there about, I really went through this very quickly. Probably could be a whole different presentation, a separate presentation, but does anybody have any questions about these kinds of situations where you're gone through a divorce or you're raising a child who is not your biological child who has Fragile X syndrome and dealing with an ex-partner of your partner?
Nothing's come in. I have one previous question, but I'll throw that out as soon as we finish this section.
Okay. Well, I think we can move to, there's a couple of more things. Counseling can be helpful, allowing your children to help, but not too much. In other words, the child who doesn't have special needs not to become another parent, and accepting help from others. Here's a very difficult one. None of us can do any of this alone, so being able to say what we need and asking for help, whether it's through, assistance through the system or a neighbor, and then being able to take time for yourself, which is always a challenge. Here's a couple of resources that might be helpful. This book, Married with Special Needs Children, is really excellent. If I were going to write a book, this is the book I wish I would have written. But and then also Mom's House, Dad's House is an excellent book for families who are going through divorce and how to manage raising the children in a way that's really healthy so they can have a healthy relationship with both parents. And then here is my contact information, but this would be a good time for any other questions that may have come up. Jane, did you have some more questions?
I do. So one question that came up, we have, she said, we are doing as much of this as possible, but are still burning out. Do you have any ideas?
I don't know what that means by burning out. I mean the relationship or just totally exhausted from what this is like?
Probably a little bit of both.
A little bit of both, okay.
I'm going to guess. I'm going to read that in.
Yeah, they're doing everything they can, but it's still really, really tough. A couple of things. Sometimes getting professional help can be really good because it's kind of like you're trying everything you can. Maybe a different perspective would be helpful. There's some things that we can't necessarily repair on our own, much as we try. So that might be some time to get some help. Also, reaching out to other families or couples who also have children with special needs and socializing with them and being able to talk about what some of these kinds of difficulties can be, to know that you're not alone. I don't know, that's not specific, I'm sure, to this particular question, but sometimes when you feel like you've done everything you can, it may be time to get some help.
And I think that's good. I think what I hear from a lot of families are, when a child has behavior issues, that seems to be a very challenging time for the whole family.
Absolutely.
Dealing with the child, the parent relationship. It puts so much stress on the entire family that I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I always suggest that they kind of come up with a plan, at least so if it seems to be the behavior causing some of the stressors, what can you do? And it's easy to say, to kind of get what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of get stuck, on what to do. but coming up with a plan on at least something you can try to address the behavior, and that just seems to reduce some of the tension in the house. But I don't know if you have another idea too, when something like behavior is causing stress in the entire.
Sure. Yeah, okay, so here's just an additional piece to that. I mean, there is the issue about the behavior itself and how stressful that can be. Oftentimes what I'll see with couples is the way a husband and wife, the mother and father, are dealing with the behavior is different and also causing stress. So, in other words, the parents' different responses to that behavior. Are they on the same page? You know, raising children, inevitably, people don't agree 100% of the time about parenting issues. And it's the same thing with behaviors. So oftentimes I will hear, and you may hear this too, Jane, that you have a behavioral plan, but it's not always being followed by, there's not consistency between the parents. Or children respond differently to mother than father. That happens a lot. So being able to be on the same page, sometimes it has to do with other kinds, how people respond to their children, and whether they're able to actually get on the same page with their partner may have a lot to do sometimes with how they view their child, what they think their child is capable of, whether they feel really sorry for their child, or they feel like their child isn't, is making excuses, or, whatever it is. There's oftentimes reasons why the parents have a hard time working together with those behaviors. So that can be a piece of the stress as well as the behavior itself.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you do see that. You do see that, and actually, that's something you have to start working on when the kids are very little. You start to see differences in discipline and responses to it. That's something you definitely have to work on together. So it's a little bit past 7. How about if there's one more comment, and you can. Our burnout usually occurs when we haven't been able to connect. We do have a marriage counselor, and we have seen when we get to the point of burnout. Being mindful and intentional about being partners on this journey helps. When we get overwhelmed, that's when we want to throw in the towel. I need a bigger bathtub and a big box of Calgon.
But what you're saying in this statement is that you've developed a way to kind of recalibrate when you realize that you're getting to a point of throwing in the towel. I wonder what it would take to be able to not have to wait to that point. Are there some things you could do to check in with each other and maybe visit that marriage counselor before you're on the way out to the divorce lawyer or ready to kill each other or something like that? So, in other words, some kind of maintenance that might be helpful, because it sounds like this couple is really doing what they need to do. It's good. They, when they're at the breaking point, they get help.
But that's a good point. I mean, we talk about our children, and hyperarousal is the big, is a big deal, and using a sensory diet so that you're kind of taking care of things so that you don't have, the meltdowns. And I suppose the same thing really applies to our relationship too. Is trying to take care of it along the way, knowing that sometimes you're going to have an outburst, like our kids do. But
absolutely,
for the most part, you're checking in on a regular basis. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Because it's what this person is addressing is the disconnection. So there's a disconnection. So how do you plug into each other again?
And how do you keep doing that plugging in so that you don't get to it doesn't
right.
It doesn't get to that point.
Yeah, but I think this is inevitable in in relationships, that there is going to be disconnect, coming together and coming apart and coming together. There's a sort of a natural flow of that. So kind of understanding that is not unusual or pathological or a danger sign. It just takes, again, attention and intention.
Very good, yes. So we're approaching, we're already past the hour. If people have additional questions, would you like them to email me and I forward them to you, or can people email you directly?
Oh, they can email me directly, unless you would like a record of that. I don't know. But that's fine. Yeah, my email address is here, and that would be fine.
Okay. Well, on that note, is there anything else you would like to say tonight, Diane, before we close?
No, I think that wraps it up. I mean, it's such a big overview for such a huge topic. So it's just touching on it. And some of these things that we've talked about may seem really obvious to a lot of people. I guess what I want to say in closing is, in some ways it's simple, but it's just not easy.
I think that's good advice to leave us with.
Mm.
So thank you. Thank you, Diane, for sharing your expertise with us.
You're welcome.
So for you on the webinar, we have several webinars coming up this year. The next one will be about adults with Fragile X syndrome. So look for an email announcement in the next few weeks, and watch for them over the next year. We had 6 webinars last year, and we're planning to do the same this year on a variety of topics. So thank you for joining us. Have a good evening, and we'll be. I'm always here if you need anything. I'm Jane. It's JAYNE @fragilex.org. Send me an email if you have any questions or you need anything. Diane, thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.